Welcome back to the channel, guys. I finally did it. I finally made it. It's part 2, or rather how to really make your GoPro footage stand out and look more cinematic. So we're gonna break this tutorial down into 3 parts. We're gonna cover hardware, some of the audio, and then finally, and most importantly, we're gonna cover some editing techniques and post-production of your GoPro footage. So first things first, let's go ahead and dive right into the hardware. So these days I'm shooting on a GoPro Hero 10 with a Polar Pro ND filter. I typically use the ND8 filter. I have that set up on my mouth mount so I can quickly pop the GoPro in my mouth if I'm just shooting solo and doing first person view shots. Plugged into the GoPro mic adapter with this sweet setup I got going on. Some rubber bands. I lost my zip ties and needed to hold the mic adapter on. And attached to the mic adapter I have the Rode VideoMic Pro, which is a super sweet microphone, and then a dead cat over it to help with wind. And so this really brings your footage up to the next level when you have good audio with your GoPro. All of that is attached to like a handlebar mount, and then finally the GoPro El Grande pole. Now, shooting with a setup like this definitely has its perks. It's far more convenient, the form factor, you're not worrying about gimbals, calibration, but it also has its downsides too. So for instance, if you're using ND filters and you want motion blur with your GoPro, motion blur plus hypersmooth, they don't go too well together. And that's purely because the hypersmooth needs good lighting. And so basically what you're doing with an ND filter is you're putting those sunglasses on your GoPro so you can bring down the shutter speed and create the motion blur, and then in return hypersmooth doesn't really know what to do, so you get a lot of jittery effects, a lot of weird blurs in your footage. And so you have to kind of know some rules, and then you have to break them when you're shooting with just a GoPro pole. And if you guys are unfamiliar with ND filters, I would definitely recommend checking out my tutorial on ND filters and GoPros. It'll kind of get your toes wet, get you a better understanding of some basic filmmaking principles that will have you well on your way to making your footage look more cinematic. So you definitely have to bend some rules to get some smooth, buttery footage with your GoPro if you're just using a GoPro pole or no gimbal. It's also worth the trade-off. It's worth the form factor. It's worth not having to fumble around with the gimbal out on the hill while your buddies are ready to film. They're in the zone, and oftentimes when not, you don't want to get them out of that. You want to make sure that they're feeling comfortable and they can stop the tricks they need to. So now that you guys know my setup, let's go ahead, let's dive into some of the GoPro settings that I've found that work relatively well using hypersmooth and ND filters that I typically use almost every day. Let's get into it. Okay, so we've got our GoPro Hero 10 all fired up. We've already got some of my settings dialed in, but I'm going to go ahead and select our actual mode here. And we're going to get some options. Go ahead and select whatever mode you're on or whatever mode you'd like to modify. Hit the pencil icon. And it's going to take us into our basic settings first. So first and foremost, I like to change my resolution and my frames per second here. My resolution I like to shoot in these days is a 4:3 aspect ratio in 4K at minimum and at 60 frames per second. And so the reason I like to shoot in the 4:3 aspect ratio is solely because in post, when you are tracking your subject or reframing your subject, you have a lot more vertical space to work with when exporting to a 16:9, or even better, when you're exporting to a social story such as Instagram, Snapchat, or TikTok. Next up is the lens, and so when I'm doing any follow cams or action sports, I always shoot in a wide mode. And finally, my hypersmooth these days, I actually keep in hypersmooth boost, which is insane because with the ND filter and motion blur. So scroll down and we're going to get into our Pro Tune settings. So let's just quick hop through these one by one. First and foremost, we're going to change our bitrate to high instead of standard, and it's going to allow for more detail. But a note about the bitrate is make sure you have a memory card that's a large capacity. It's going to take up a lot more space. It's capturing more information, and make sure you have a SD card that can handle the right speeds of 4K at high bitrate. Otherwise, you may see 10-second clips and then your GoPro stops, and it's incredibly frustrating and it can allow you to miss clips. Next up, depending on the day, I like to keep my shutter speed at one stop beyond the 180-degree rule. So essentially, since I'm shooting at 60 frames per second, rather than shooting at 1/120th frames per second, I like to shoot at 1/240th. And I found that that kind of really helps alleviate the weird glitches you get with hypersmooth in low light conditions when you're shooting in the 180-degree rule. So works great. So if I was shooting at 120 frames per second, I'd probably shoot at 1/480 in that instance. All right, moving down. I like to keep my white balance at about 5,000 or 5,500 K. Not the biggest deal. You can certainly adjust this to your preference and what you're getting, but I find that that usually creates the most realistic looking snow or best white balance for snow. My ISO min, I tend to leave at 100, and my ISO max, I also like to leave at 100 these days. And if you do have to adjust your ISO max and it is low light, and you might not have other ND filters as options, you might not have your clear filter, I tend to stick it at 400 at max. And that, again, is just to reduce the noise in the image and keep quality up. Now, the GoPro Hero 10 has gotten so much better at noise reduction within the camera, and it's great. So I really wouldn't worry too much about having your ISO max at around 400. All right, the final two I would highly recommend changing is going to be your sharpness from high to low. Definitely recommend low. It's something that can easily be added in post-production. And finally, I like to shoot in the flat color profile, and then this gives me more flexibility in post to change colors, to set the mood, to either warm it up, cool it off, change your cloud colors, and really just make all the colors pop with full control. If color grading or correcting isn't for you, they do have a natural color profile now, which is really good. I would highly recommend shooting this if you plan on not doing any sort of post color grading whatsoever. But if you do, go ahead and shoot in flats. Okay, that pretty much nails them. So we'll hop back here, and I like to set up all my little shortcuts. So I have my ISO max there, my lens, either wide, super view, etc., my hyper smooth, and finally my shutter speed, so I can quickly adjust those on the fly rather than diving through menu after menu after menu. And it's really as simple as that. Let's open up Adobe Premiere Pro and go over some of the editing techniques next. So we've got Adobe Premiere Pro open. I've got the bare bones minimum of my project opened up. I just have some audio files in here, which I just went to Epidemic Sound for my commercial music on a personal plan. I think it's like $15 a month, and they have some banger tracks for sure. So I would highly recommend them. Yeah, it's a pretty dope site, and the reason I love Epidemic Sound versus any other music provider is if you want to download some tracks, you can download the full mix as one MP3, or you can download all the stems. And I find that really comes in handy in edits like this, where I've brought in the drums, the melodies, and everything, and I've needed to cut them up or bring down the levels of specific elements to the song, or chop and screw them, remix it, whatever you want to call it, to line it up with my video a little bit better. So absolutely love them. Highly recommend checking out Epidemic Sound. They're linked in the description if you want to check them out. But yeah, definitely works well if you want to post to multiple platforms and not worry about copyrighted music or try to find trended songs and then obtain those in less than ideal ways. Okay, so now that we've got our audio loaded in, the next step here is going to be loading our clips into our bin. So dragging and dropping your files into Adobe Premiere, and then finding the clips you want to use, which I've got the 3 clips I used for the intro all lined up here. Let's go ahead and take a look. So we've got clip 1, we've got this clip, which is Gabe, and then we have a couple clips here. My audio, I have this chopped up a little different. Okay, so we've got our next clip, and then finally we have this line of Gabe going through Sunset Parks right here, and I don't believe this is going to be the full clip quite yet, but that's okay. All right, so we've got our clips, and it may prompt you for sequence settings when you drop your clip in for the first time. So it may prompt you for this box right here. Now, I like to shoot, it totally depends on what platform I'm shooting for. So if I was shooting for Instagram, a reel, or TikTok, I would put this to 1080 by 1920, and that's going to make it a 9:16, that vertical aspect ratio. But for today's purposes, I think we're just going to run it in 1080p, which I prefer for YouTube. Now the other thing is, since we shoot in 60 frames per second, you want to bring the time code or time base down to 23.976, so we're good to go. And you're going to notice when you switch it over to 1080p versus 4K, your footage is huge, which is awesome, because when you're shooting in that 4:3 aspect ratio, you have so much vertical space to work with here, and you've got so much footage to work with to kind of move your footage around and keep it in frame. So that way, if you're screwing up the shot while filming, you can kind of fix it in post, and it makes a world of difference. So we've got our clips loaded in, we've got our audio loaded in, but we kind of have to start making a flow between the visual and the audio. So one thing I like to do is map out my beats for my audio. So I like to make my waveforms very large, where I can see every beat, where I can make quick, fast cuts or hard cuts to the next clip. And I'll go down here as well, and you'll see, we've got the melody going on, or the guitar. But one little trick I like to use is I like to select my audio, and I like to play it back, and then if you tap the M key while playing it back to the tempo, it'll automatically make markers where you can snap your footage to much faster, much more rapidly. So I'll quick show you what that's like. So I'm going to hit spacebar, the audio is going to play, and I'm just going to tap the M key on my keyboard to make those markers. Okay, so you guys can see here, we've got a bunch of markers placed, where now, if I was to move this clip, for instance, and try and cut it, you're going to see that those markers highlight as it snaps to that, which will basically allow me to quickly cut up my clips and do it far more accurately and on beat. So we've got some markers laid out, we've got our clips. Let's dive right into the editing process. All right, so I'm just going to run through this clip quick. All right, so we've got Emil hitting a little side hit. Oh, look at that. Perfect. Perfect. Coming down right into frame, and he might be a little bit too large here as well. So there's some things we can do with our GoPro footage that are built right into Premiere that's going to make this less fisheyed, more like a cinematic lens, and so on. So if you go into your effects tab and you go into your effects search on the top right, you're going to go ahead and type in GoPro, and it's going to bring up a bunch of different options. And they may be a little bit outdated, but they're going to work for the most part. So since we were shooting in 4K wide, not cinema wide, the 4:3, we're just going to drag that onto a clip, and you're going to immediately notice that the clip is kind of stretched differently. It's going to give you some options in your effects controls where you can adjust the curvature of your lens. And so this is going to come down to personal preference. It defaults at -30, which is totally fine. I like to sit between -20 and -30 depending on the clip to kind of level out that fisheye effect. So I've got my GoPro footage a little bit, decurved, if you will, and we just need to get Emil in frame a little bit. So we're going to just zoom out till we like a nice frame where he's at. Okay, so we know we kind of want him there, and maybe I kind of like that look where the board down below. So he's dropping in, we'll see him kind of drop into frame, and so on. So I'm going to go ahead and scrub back to the beginning of my clip. Okay, so he's coming in, and now this clip is happening pretty fast. Definitely would recommend slowing it down. But there's one step we have to do before we slow it down. So we're going to scrub back to the beginning of the clip here. I like to hit this little stopwatch icon and create a keyframe for my position and for my scale. And I like to kind of figure out where I want the shot to start with, and I think we'll actually kind of leave it in the middle here. And then I like to move forward on my timeline. All right, we see Emil moving in. And I want this kind of moved over a little bit so he's framed right there. And so if I double click on my footage, I can drag the position around to anywhere I want. And it's going to create a new keyframe, and it's basically telling it in between these frames, the original position should translate to the new position. So you're going to kind of see that happening. I'm pretty pleased with that. I'm going to move that clip over. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to my speed and duration. I'm just going to cut that in half to 50%. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's play this back. Let's see how it looks. All right, looks pretty good. I just think that his board is coming in a little bit too late. So I'm just going to bring that clip down, move it over, cut it off, and all right, that looks good. And we've got another beat drop right here. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that clip, and we're going to move into the next one. Line that up, and you'll see here that quick cut. All right, sweet. And looks like this clip may be a little bit off, a little further off than I anticipated when I dragged it in. So I'm going to extend that. Oh, wow. Well, that might be a good clip. I might have grabbed the wrong one, and it might work in our favor. So let's go ahead. Let's take a look at this clip. Okay, so we've got a nice little side hit from Elliot here, and I think starting right there, a little bit in the action is going to be good. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go ahead and grab our GoPro 4K wide effect. I'm going to bring that down to -25. Again, kind of just making that more linear lens. And bring it to the start of the playhead, or start of the clip. Keyframe my position in scale. Double click on the clip, and I'm going to move Elliot right to the center here. We're just going to move forward. Okay, so he's pretty high here. He's way out of frame. But now I can kind of move him up into frame. And we're going to move a little bit further. All right, he got out of frame, and I'm just going to drag him right into frame again. And perfect. We'll just have him ride out to the next beat. And we're going to clip that. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's take a look. Now this could work kind of in the full speed. Yeah, I think it works full speed, or if we want to go ahead and slow it down, see if it goes. Also works like so. So let's just go ahead, let's try that. I'm going to move this clip down, kind of get them in the air. Kind of just creating that dramatic feel as the song ramps up, and we're going to go ahead and cut that. So you know, and I really don't like that he lands if he's in slow-mo. I feel like that is just a little bit, it just doesn't match the song yet. So slow-mo, all right, sending, yes, so let's play that back. Perfect. All right, so the next clip, we've got Gabe here, and this clip is a little bit off just because I had it kind of set up prior, but I'm going to go ahead and extend this clip out quite a bit actually, because I know it's a long line. All right, so we've got the start here. Perfect. And I'm going to bump that up. And now this is where we're really going to pay attention to the beat, right? So we're going to try and change it on every kick or every snare. And then you can kind of break that rule as needed too. Okay, so this clip, I was close to Gabe. So 100% is a little bit much. So we're going to move it into about 48%. And we're just going to at our GoPro decurver, if you will. Put that at minus 25. And now that I am zoomed out, you're going to notice I don't have a lot of room to work with without getting black. So this is just called bad filming at its finest, where Gabe is just cut off and really there's nothing I can do about it. So we'll just keyframe out the scale and position and we'll have to roll with it. Okay. So you know what? I don't even want to use that clip, to be honest. I'm not too proud of that. So I'm going to go ahead, get rid of that, cut that out, and we're going to go right to this box hit. And we're going to take a look. We'll just play it back and see what we're working with. Okay. So great clip. And we can see here on the audio, again, since we're using a microphone, we have very clean audio and clean waveform, so I can tell kind of exactly where the board slaps on the landing, which is sweet. So I'm going to go ahead and put a marker there because we know he lands there, so roughly at that frame. And then we can also see where he hits the box, which should be right here. Yep, and so he's hitting the box, and we're going to put a marker. And one cool thing you can do when editing like snowboard footage or something is if I see that marker, I can match that audio up with the hit of the song as well. So what I'm going to actually do is just make this clip a little smaller, and those two markers from when he lands on the box to when the song drops should line up pretty good. And it's going to make it much more dramatic and immerse you far more. Okay. All right. I mean, decent. So you can see here, clap, and he's landing. And you know what? I would honestly probably move that up a little bit. I think I put it a little too far back. So let's try it. There it is. Okay, so that's in line, and song is picking up, so it's a good time to bring, you know, all of our clips to full speed if we want, or we can leave them in slow motion and, you know, go with that dramatic vibe. Now, one thing we'll see is the landing hits right there, but I really want the landing to hit right here. So what I'm going to do now is, because I want the landing lined up with this hit, I am going to probably cheat the system a little bit, and we're going to go ahead and hit slow motion by using the razor tool and C on your keyboard for the hotkey. We're going to put them into slow motion as soon as that hit happens, so the element changes. And then we're going to find kind of where he lands, which is right here. And then we're just going to speed this one up, clip it again, back to 100. And I didn't quite get it, which is fine. We'll just put this to like 60. That should do it. No, still not quite. We'll just use our rate stretch tool otherwise to kind of fill in the gaps. So cut the clip where it hits, put the rest of the clip in slow motion, get a good estimate, and then cut them, and don't move them around, and you can't really extend them either, otherwise the clips won't line up anymore. And I use the rate tool to just fill in the gap. So it should slow down, and then it should speed up. All right. And then that landing kind of hits on cue. Perfect. All right, so we're going to move forward. And you know what? I really, really do like this clip, but I do not like it in fast motion. I think it just looks cool. So I'm immediately going to slow this one down. And we've got 2 beats to work with here. So And so we've got the cut happening at the first beat, and the second beat I'm just going to go ahead and cut, and I'm going to just jump a few frames, right? And so when that beat hits, he's going to kind of skip. And we'll do it one more time. See how that looks. Cutting the clip, moving it in. Perfect. And on this next cut, we're just going to go ahead and have him getting on the box. Ooh, he already landed on beat. I kind of like that. But it's way too fast. You can't just go slow motion. That's just not going to cut it. So let's go ahead. Let's right click, change this all to slow-mo. And oof. Talking about good audio, guys. This is why you need to use an external microphone with your GoPro. Let's just go ahead and solo out this track and bring it back. So you hear that? That is some good snowboarding sounds right there. Crisp, clear. Yep, that's what you need. So that almost lines up perfectly with that hit. So I'm going to go ahead and just bump that over a couple frames until this wave matches up with the next hit. So right about there, that should do it. And we'll just extend that back and we'll see how this looks. All right. Perfect. So and then we've got some more kicks we can work with. 3 kicks. So we're going to go ahead and apply a cut at the first clip, move it a couple frames, and it's kind of a fast variation of kicks. So we can honestly, what I did in the original is I just found a couple spots where Gabe was, you know, peering off into the sun, looking good. And it's a little dark here. So what we'll do is we'll just make this a little bit more unique. Make that cut there. And I'm just going to scale this up and then double click, and I'm just going to move here, and it's going to be a quick cut, right? So you're going to just get in sync with the music, and we'll move this forward right into this next feature. Okay, now we definitely have a little bit more wiggle room here. I'll zoom in a little bit, and let's see how this looks. Okay, so not a lot that I have to do with this clip either. Just make a cut. So let's take a look. And we're just going to cut it at that beat. And let's see if we have anything to work with as far as syncing up our audio. All right, so ideally we would want the landing to hit on the snare. So if I line this up to right there, this should work. And again, we'll just run that up to the next beat. Perfect. All right, and we're coming into some of the final clips here. We'll just keep scrubbing through. Doing his little trick here. Alrighty, you'll notice here I used those audio stems and I cut the music down a little bit lower, the clap that's coming in, because I really wanted to emphasize that landing of the snowboard, that carving, and start building into a climax as Gabe heads towards the jumps and gets a little sendy. Okay, so let's go ahead. Okay, beats are about to really pick up. I'm going to switch this over to 100% speed. We're going to cut in a little bit quicker into these jumps. Let's see how it plays out. Almost got it perfect. So we're going to take a look where he lands with the audio. Oh my goodness, what am I doing? Sweet. Let's see. Oop, we missed it. Let's just go ahead and solo out that. Let's see where he lands. Okay, so that is where he lands. I'm going to make a marker. We know that's where he lands, and we know the beat drops. Where does the beat drop? Right here. So we just want to make sure that that landing is synced up right there. All right. Yeah, I kind of like that. I mean, in the original clip, we had a lot more slow-mo and whatnot, but for time's sake and seeing that this is already becoming a long tutorial, we're not going to get too far in depth into that one. But the next step for this clip, because he's not perfectly in frame, is going to be to set up our keyframes again. And we're going to go ahead and create 2 new keyframes with this position, and we'll kind of move Gabe into frame without getting those black bars. Alright, I do not like him far over, so I'm just going to, well, figure out that I screwed up that shot too. No surprise there. Alright, we've got Gabe here. Now we've got him landing, so let's get him kind of right here. Play a little rule of thirds. Awesome, he's coming in. Get him right back into the center here. Sweet. Ooh, now we're moving quick. All right. I want them in the center. Great. Now what I'm going to do here that I haven't showed you yet is I'm going to keyframe my scale, and that's going to give me more to work with along the edges. And I'm not going to lose quality since we shot on 4K and we're scaling down to 1080p, so as long as I stay under 100% scale or 100 or lower, you're going to still retain all your quality. So I'm actually going to redo these a little bit as we scaled up. Okay, so the video is automatically scaling. I'm going to go to the next keyframe. Okay, now we've got Gabe right in the center. Sweet. Right in the center. And we'll move forward. Oh, yep. We really want that to hit. So we're going to actually kind of probably move the camera a little bit beyond what we need to, and then we'll move it right back up. And that's it. Boom. All right, let's see how that looks. Let's cut that. Okay. Oh, and actually what happened there, this brings me into a great point about scaling and moving your position around at the same time. It can get tricky, it can get difficult, and it can get frustrating. So let's scrub back, and you're going to see the black bar right there. I was not paying attention, and one of my keyframes with this scale change is causing that to happen. So right here, we want to go ahead and just move that right back up. And let's see how that looks. Oh, we're still getting it. So I'm going to delete one of these. I'm going to go to the next one. Too much. Let's see. Quite peculiar. And we're going to go ahead and change the temporal interpolation to continuous. Bezier, don't really know. All right, and that bar is still there, right here. That is a no-no, so I'm going to delete that keyframe. And we're honestly going to leave it as is, otherwise it's bending down, and we're kind of losing that border. But that looks pretty dang good. Okay, so clips are in order, scale is set up, the positioning set up, the de-widening of the GoPro is done. Next step, after we've synced up our audio, is of course we want to take a look at our audio here on audio track 1. And I like to go to my audio track mixer, and I like to throw a limiter or a compressor on there. I would definitely look into what compressors and limiters do and how one will compress audio and make quieters higher and vice versa. But I like to basically go into my audio track mixer, add a limiter so the audio balances out a little bit. I like to add a little bit of gain to it and add my pre-gain, bring up the audio, which will apply this effect to the whole audio one track. That way I'm not actually raising or lowering my actual decibels here. So we'll leave that at 0 or 1. There we go. And just add a little pre-gain, add a limiter, and it's perfect. Okay. Final step is add a little bit of your own creative flair, and that is going to be done with adjustment layers. So I like to go ahead and hit new item, create an adjustment layer. Should be set up to the same as your sequence settings. All right. I'm going to grab my adjustment layer, and this will basically apply effects over all your clips that it's above. And I definitely love changing the colors of GoPros. So again, the reason we set up the GoPros in those original settings with those flat color profiles, the de-sharpening or low sharpness profile, is so we can add things like adjustment layers and change our exposures, our colors, whatever you need, and have a lot more flexibility with them. Now that we've got our adjustment layer, we'll go ahead and click and highlight our adjustment layer. We'll click the color tab in the top of Premiere, and we'll go to our Lumetri scopes, Lumetri, however you want to say it. I'm not a stickler, I don't even know. Okay. Now, I set up my scopes with a Parade RGB and a Waveform RGB. Those are the two I really like to work off of that I can edit very quickly and efficiently. I'm by no means great at color grading. I'm actually not good at it at all. So, this is your horrible crash course on color grading, but it should get you in the right direction. All right, so you're going to notice all these colors on the left, and the whites are going to represent all three colors mixed together, and you're going to notice the reds, and it basically makes up the image. So you can technically see the image that you're looking at on the right through all these colors. It's making a graph or a waveform representation of where the colors lay, where all the whites lay and how bright they are. So at 255, that's going to be full brightness, and at 0 is going to be black, and in certain areas of the clip. So you can kind of see here we have trees, right? And we have these dark spots right here. Boom, 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 boom. And we have a little tree branch here, which I'm assuming is right around here. We have some red that's pretty dark in the clip. And then we have a whole lot of white and blue tint across the spectrum. So you can kind of actually see your clip within this, which is cool. But the big thing in my crash course of color grading is where do your whites lie, or your brightest brights and your darkest darks. And as you can see here, we have things trying to surpass 0. So they're clipping past actual black, which is going to give you distortion or noise in your clip. And part of that is the GoPro settings I was on, and going into a darker lit area will cause basically these blacks to be formed, right? And when we clip beyond that black, I can't get any of that data back, no matter how high I raise my blacks here. You can see it's going to lighten the whole screen, but I'm really not getting any data back. And if I bring that down, you can see how it clips out and really makes a gross looking image. But anywho, I like to bring my blacks up just a little bit, so if there was any other clips throughout the video that we're going to go beyond that, as they're moving through, I like to kind of have that above, if you will. So I'm going to bring up my blacks a little bit. I'm also going to bring up my whites, moving the whole opposite end of the spectrum up quite a bit. And again, you'll see that they start clipping and things will get blown out and overexposed. So we're just going to go ahead and bring up our whites. We'll bring up our exposure a little bit, which will kind of bring everything. And our shadows lying down here too. We're going to go ahead, bring up our shadows. Our highlights are looking pretty good. I like my highlights to sit around 230, and then my shadows somewhere in between 76 or 50 to like 102 roughly. And we'll see. So everything's looking pretty good. It's looking a little cold. I want it a little bit warmer, so I'm going to go ahead and just add a hair of warmth by changing my temperature. And then I'm going to add a little bit of contrast as well. So that should start to make things look good. Then I'm going to go ahead and click my creative right here, and we'll do a little bit of sharpening, and we're going to make it a little bit more vibrant, and we'll crank the saturation a little bit. Okay, so it's looking pretty good. Let's see with and without. Okay, pretty dark, a little bit more vibrant. I think we can honestly go a little more super saturated. Okay. So our whites aren't really clipping. Everything's looking good. Nice and vibrant. Oh, and we switched clips. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my adjustment layer. So those effects on this portion are only applied here. And I'm going to take this adjustment layer. We'll cut it at the end of the clip. We can see here that my whites are way too high now. And so we're going to just bring those whites down. Kind of match them up. I'm going to honestly bring those up just a little bit. And we're actually pretty good there. Great. Super saturated, nice and crisp, and we're into Gabe stuff. And you can see here it was dark. We have sun coming in from the side of the trees, making a lot of coverage and making for a really bad film, unfortunately. Okay. Great. Let's go ahead. Let's bump up the exposure completely. We want those shadows up a bit. Blacks. Don't want them clipping. There we go. That's looking pretty good. Let's just scrub through. No, I think we're a little too high on our whites here. Great. I'm actually pretty pleased with that. Still getting detail. All right, it's getting a little bit brighter. You can see here we're pushing the limit as far as whites and highlights go because everything is so near clipping. But I'm digging it. And boom, that's it. Let's go ahead. Let's run this back. Let's take a look. Okay, everything looks pretty good. Of course, you can mess with the color even more. There's so many settings you can really dive into. You can go ahead, you can go back into your color effects tab and play with your curves, play with your hue versus saturation. You've got color matching, which is pretty cool. You know, you can change your shadows, midtones, everything. Really, really set the mood for whatever you're kind of trying to portray through your footage. But ultimately, that's really it. The biggest things are when you import your GoPro footage, to make sure you're going into the effects tab, you're adding that GoPro effect, you're de-widening your footage, and then you're going to go through, you're going to pick the song that's going to set the right mood, and then you edit to that song, and then bring out your audio above the song and have a healthy balance or a healthy mix between the two. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial, and more importantly, I hope you learned something. If you guys do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram or drop a comment below. I try and get back to those as soon as I can and answer up anything. If you guys want to see any other tutorials in the future, please let me know. I'm happy to make them, happy to help out. If you guys did enjoy the video though, you know the drill. Please hit that like button, please hit that subscribe button, and I hope to see you guys soon.